Bence.
While there's still no word on a cure for the virus,
report suspicious activity and call 911.
I can give you every assurance, Mr. Rooney, that Gareth is ill and he's very
If it was anybody, it's above us. The pass was like 30 seconds ago. This is a UFO.
All right, man. So we got to get over the episode 1 hump. Truth be told, if this is the first episode that people are listening to, we've actually recorded a version of what we wanted to be the first episode at least 3 or 4 times. But I think the important thing here today is to talk about why we decided to do a podcast, what we're going to talk about in this podcast, the exciting things that we have coming up in the podcast, why we think people should listen to this podcast and no podcast. Wait, I messed it up. I meant to say and no other podcast, but I just said and no podcast. Cool.
I mean, it works. It's fun.
And no other podcast. Where do you want to start, bro?
I mean, this is kind of it's kind of like the origin story, right? So
Yeah, like a quick, fast-paced, like a Guy Ritchie version of the origin story.
yeah, kind of like the Rambo montage where you see him pull his headband tight.
That's exactly what
Puts
I'm.
his
They
knife
can't
in the
see me,
sheath.
but that's exactly what I'm doing right now.
Yep, exactly.
And then tying the boots. You remember that move?
Loading bullets in the machine gun.
They even brought that over to or did that come from the Rambo cartoon?
Did it?
I don't know, man. It was definitely in the Rambo cartoon. I don't know if that's where it first started, but anyway, okay, cool. Origin story.
Should we go back and kind of just tell how we met and the band days and all that kind of stuff?
When did we meet? Probably 2000.
It's been a while.
Probably 2000, right? Around then? Maybe 2001, 2002.
Oh, you mean the first time?
Yeah, the first, yeah. We were in separate bands. Our bands played together, and then we figured out that you and I were hanging out more than we were with the dudes in our separate bands.
Well, but then years later, then we would come back to get back together.
Yeah.
This would have been before that. So we were playing at a theater show in Dahlonega, Georgia.
Yep. Holly Theater, man.
Holly
Awesome.
Theater.
Awesome, cool place.
It was awesome. Yeah, it was great. So yeah, we met, and then Woody and I hung out the whole night, pretty much. We just immediately clicked, and then we didn't see each other for it was just an acquaintance kind of thing. Man, that was a cool dude, right on. And then
well, no, because we played one show somewhere down in Atlanta. Remember, it was some
did we?
restaurant or something.
I kind of do remember that.
So it's just one of those shows that somehow we both just ended up doing. We're oh, hey, what's up, dude? After the Holly show. Then years later, after I graduated from college and stuff, I think you were still with that old band. I don't remember, but basically I had the hots for this girl who
Was best friends with my girlfriend at the time.
And I didn't know it, And one day you and your girlfriend at the time came to visit her, and I saw you. I'm dude, what's up? And then that girl, who is now my wife, was wait a second, you guys know each other? And then you and I formed, we figured out that our tastes in music, and as people will begin to learn throughout this show, movies, just everything, basically just is super parallel in a lot of ways.
Pretty spot on.
But
before that, before we sort of started writing, at that point I was living in LA and I was really unhappy with the band, and I'd come home for I think a week or something, and then that's when we had sort of we were hey man, let's hang out and write a couple songs or whatever, and we got together in your old apartment.
Yeah, dude, 1 bedroom,
no furniture. We sat on the floor, and it was just boxes, and
had a TV that was on one of those old trunks.
Yeah, oh yeah. And so we immediately hit it off, and see, the thing is too is at the time, the band that I was in, I was sort of writing everything, but it had kind of become its own sort of monster because it was heavy and sort of new metal-ish, and And even though I was writing the music, I was totally over it. It was like I was having to serve whatever everybody thought that band was supposed to be like. But I had, all my interest had been gone.
Yeah, you like evolved, but you still had to like write songs in that same like genre, and you just were kind of sick of it.
Yeah, I hated it.
And then, dude, I don't know if you remember this, but when we hung out that day, we wrote like 10 songs just boom.
It was
and
immediate.
It was just like, holy cow, man, these songs are just amazing. And then just like we always do, it was kind of like, oh man, so we started planning like this is going to be awesome. And then we're like, wait a minute, we got to get a bassist and a drummer. And then we found those guys, and we definitely want to have them on the show. And then we'll just do like a much deeper dive into the origin of our band and how we got signed, toured the country, have a bunch of hilarious stories, met a bunch of amazing people. Man, golly. I mean, that's truly, man, I don't know about you, but aside from just like the fun of just literally being in our 20s and not having any responsibilities other than just showing up and playing music, like the thing that I missed the absolute most are all the people that we met along the way. Like every single person that was in any crowd in any city that we ever met, dude, that was the absolute best, man.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the best friendships and connections that we ever made. My kids.
We have kids too, by the way. I have two. Woody has two. So
so we're dads.
Get used to that.
And they're going to interrupt the podcast constantly. But anyway, like I said, like I really want to like dedicate an entire episode to the band, to the music and all that. And then we'll start incorporating some of our music in the outros of this show. So after that, I mean, one of the passions that I know you had growing up, I mean, throughout your whole life, I think was like drawing, right?
Yeah.
Drawing. And so I think you should go into a little bit about like what you're doing now with that.
Yeah. So long before I started playing music, my earliest memory I can think of, my dad left when I was a little kid, probably 3 or 4. And so it was just my mom and I, and she was working at the bank, and she would bring these huge like reams of paper, like printer paper that was all connected, so it was like one giant sheet of paper. And I just remember just burning through those things and just drawing. So that's all I did, like pretty much my whole life. I was kind of the artsy kid. My whole life, I wanted to be a comic book artist. And got to high school, I had a free ride, full scholarship to SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design. And this is when there were only the one. It was only in Savannah. I had another one to a school called the Joe Kubert School, which is Joe Kubert he's like a famous old school comic book artist. So he started like a school that percentage of people that go on to Pixar or Marvel Comics or DC or Image or these huge DreamWorks, these huge companies. It's like 95% or something. The last I heard, which is pretty amazing. More than likely, I was going to do that. And I was like, well, I'll take a year off and make some money. And that's when I started making writing music, and I realized it came really easily, and then started that previous band, and then so years later, after the Modern Society ended, the band that Woody and I were in, it was pretty tough because I got married, and there was a bunch of stuff with family stuff, but eventually I ended up going back to school at the Art Institute of Pittsburgh online while I was working in the operating room of a hospital. So then I became a graphic designer for 7 years maybe. And then just this past year, I finally got to the point where, because for the last few years I've sort of split everything, doing comic art and commissions and pinups and stuff, and then still doing graphic design. And then now it's full-time all the time, illustration and comic art. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, man. And in a future episode, we're going to do a full episode on our old band, maybe even like feature some songs and get those guys on as guests. And we'll talk about like the reality of being an indie rocker and stuff, because I get so many questions about it,
Yeah.
And it was such a large part of my life. And
that was years and years of that's all we did. So
and then the same goes for like on the comic side. So like I think it's going to be cool for people to hear about, because I think another thing about this podcast is we like so many different things, and that's I think one of the reasons why we wanted to start it is, and maybe everybody like our age, late 30s, is feeling the same thing right now, but like a super extreme feeling of nostalgia about the 80s and the, when we grew up. And so like all the things that we loved back then, whether it's watching movies on a VCR or the retro video games and collecting those things and collecting comics and
Toys
and like old like 80s horror movies and like all that stuff. Man, selfishly, we just wanted to kind of talk about that stuff, dive deep into it, and even like talk about who we are, kind of how we got to where we are now as adults and fathers and creators. And after the band kind of dissolved a little bit, I know you probably were the same. I went through this extreme, I think really the only thing I could like kind of even call it really was like a depression, really. It was,
me too.
It was like I couldn't even listen to music, man. I had zero interest.
Same here.
I was super bitter about it. You and both of us didn't even talk for like a year and a half.
Yeah. Well, we also left out the fact that so the Modern Society, the band we were in, was like an indie rock band. A lot of stage presence and stuff. And then when the band split, Woody and I, just him and I, made an entire folk album in his office, in his apartment. So we kind of kept it kind of going, but it was hard. And that was the funny thing is like, we made this like sort of folk record, and the band was called Southern Ghosts, and it was just him and I and a lot of banjo and acoustic guitars and harmonicas and stuff. To us, it was kind of a way to still make music, but not have to kind of dredge up the hard feelings of not being able to be in like a rock and roll band and tour and do all this. So it was like, we just, it was like we just focused on this one thing and, made that record. And then, but after a while, it was just...
It's just tough, man, because like life, responsibilities and stuff, it gets so hard to be able to do. But it's funny because no matter what we do as careers or whatever, I think it's impossible to remove the creativity from someone that's creative.
Yeah, for sure.
So no matter what I did, I am in insurance sales, but somehow I still like lean towards the creative. Like I did like a daily vlog for like a year, and I create like these these videos for like insurance and stuff, and I make them interesting. I learn how to video edit and do all that kind of sound engineering and all that stuff just to not only separate myself from like the thousands of insurance agents that exist, but to be creative, man. And so I think that's another thing that this podcast feeds is like our creative outlet and a way for us to kind of just, dude, it's kind of like, like when we were kids, this is the equivalent of us having like 2 tomato soup cans connected by a string. Yeah, and just being like, hey, dude, what did you do today?
Well, but also I think it's fair to add also that like, and this is why I think that Woody and I clicked so fast, and why we just instantly became friends. The first time we met is because Woody and I are guys that are
super good looking,
very very handsome, but like we're the kind of guys who we can't just like if somebody calls and they're like, hey man, you want to come over and just like watch TV, or you want to come over and do this, like. That has never been appealing to us. We're the kind of guys who hey Woody, do you want to make a record? Yeah, cool. Come on over. Let's do that. Like we could never just like hang out and like bro out. It was always like based around like creating something, doing something. So I've probably lost a lot of friends that are just normal folks.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, cool. We're here hanging out. Now what are we going to do? And what are we going to make?
That's so. I've never thought about it that way, but dude, it's so true, man. Like it's hard for me, like, and my wife, her, but the audience doesn't. And my wife, like, sometimes has to kind of like remind me, like, yeah, you should go do that with whoever. Yeah, because like I'll get invited to stuff, and I'm just like, it's just not. I don't know, man. It's just not the same. And so like, I love that. Throughout the years, over the last 20 years or so that we've known each other, no matter what, we always kind of like end up creating something together. Yeah. So I'm super, super excited about this show that we're doing. Yeah. I know I kind of like lost track a minute ago, but basically like after the band, going through that depression, one of the things that I kind of did, and I think we'll talk about a little bit, but is, I was entering into like a new phase of my life. I didn't know what I was going to do professionally. I, have a degree in biology which is almost useless if you don't like pursue medicine or, like go back to grad school to do like marine biology or something like that. And I just didn't want to. So I was just like in this rut and, but I love to challenge myself. I love to make things like super hard and then like have a goal and then just bust through the expectations, you know? So that's when I started getting into like triathlons. Well, first it was like marathons. And then like I got injured training for the Chicago Marathon. And then I had a buddy that was like, hey man, you should try cycling. I was like, yeah, cyclists are pretty cool, like the Tour de France and, you know, all that. Okay, cool.
So then he mastered cycling.
So then I became a Tour de France. No, I started riding and it was awesome. I loved it. And then I met a guy that was like, yeah, man, if you like cycling, you should try triathlons. I'm like, oh, what's that? And he's like, well, you know, you swim first and then you bike and then you run. I'm like, yeah, I'll try that. And like after the first one that I trained for and did immediately, and it was just like a small sprint. After that, I was like, that was awesome. It's the hardest thing that I've ever done. Mm-hmm. But like, what's the hardest one that, you know? Oh, someone says, oh, the Ironman. I'm like, oh, what's that? And they're like, well, it's a 2.4 mile swim, 112 miles on the bike, and then a full 26.2 mile marathon after that. All in one, that's one race.
That sounds like, miserable.
I was like, I want to do that, man. Because again, like it sounds miserable. I like the pain, the anguish, and then the victory that comes after it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
well, and you went to what,
Boulder.
Denver?
Boulder.
That's
yeah.
right.
So it was like the first year that they had the Ironman in Boulder. And Boulder's like known to be like this humongous triathlon and cycling and runner, like outdoors community or whatever. So it was like a big deal.
Was that difficult for like the, because we just spent some time in Denver. We went to see Vampire Weekend at Red Rocks. What? But did you, was it difficult with like the altitude?
Yeah, so
did it affect
it would
your
have been, but I went out
breathing
there
stuff?
like a week and a half before the race and stayed in this like Airbnb and kind of acclimated, and then during the race it didn't really affect me. Yeah, so I did all that stuff. So that's been sort of a hobby. Man, we have come to the conclusion that it's impossible for us to have a first episode because there's so much that we want to say. We want to tell people who we are, why we're doing this, all this kind of stuff. So if I had to wrap it up into like a quick sort of teaser episode for people to want to come back, here's the thing. This is going to be a podcast that is going to talk about all the things that we grew up just loving. We're going to talk about ourselves. We're going to talk about our background as musicians, as creators, as what we're doing now as comic book artists and an insurance salesman that it's also triathlete and video editing and all that other stuff, all these interests that we have, ultimately to end up connecting with people that like the same stuff we do, and we're using this as a way to, at the end of the day, man, we don't get to hang out as much as we did when we were in a band together. And now that we have 2 kids each, which take up so much time and energy from as dads, to just be able to like have conversations, man, hang out, talk about cool stuff that we're into now, right?
Yeah.
Oh man, thanks for the contribution, man. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, it's something that we're already kind of doing anyway. So we might as well record it and let other folks into our world.
Yeah, because it's also not just about what we know, but also like what we can potentially learn, right?
Yeah.
Like having some of the comic book artists, I just said comic book artists on to ask them, things and learn from them about
what
stuff.
kind of brush do you use?
Boy, I can't wait to hear that one. Another thing that we're going to talk about on this show is the stuff that you got me into recently in the past, like, I don't know, man, 6 months or so. And stuff that I used to be like into when I was younger. Yeah. But I just kind of forgot about it in a way, and that is like the paranormal and the like cryptozoology and like spooky stuff, UFOs, Bigfoot, all that stuff. You've introduced me into a bunch of just my favorite podcast in the world, like Bigfoot Collectors Club.
It's the best.
Oh my gosh, man. Astonishing Legends. Those 2 shows in particular, man, like I can't listened to them enough. Like I still haven't listened to every episode of Bigfoot Collectors Club, but I try. Like I listen to new ones as they come out, and then I go back and listen to the old ones, and I'm trying to catch back up. But those dudes are the best, man.
They really are.
They've certainly inspired me to kind of like dig deep into some of those legends. Another cool thing that we're going to be doing on this show is putting our own spin on it, doing our own research, and kind of telling that story, because we're both fascinated with stories and storytelling, and kind of introducing those just really cool, like, urban myths, legends,
anything kind of on the fringe of,
and introducing that to like our audience, our new audience, and again, like putting our own sort of spin on it.
Yeah, man, I love that stuff. Which I feel like we were both probably like this as kids, but it was different as kids. It was, I was the kid who would walk out of the library with these, giant stack of books, and it would be
just steal them. Never brought them back.
I do have several. Yeah,
you have like late fees at the White County Library that are like, I don't know, $1 million.
I really do have a UFO book from the middle school library, but it would, it'd be like UFOs, Loch Ness Monster, Bermuda Triangle, Bigfoot, Yeti, and I've always loved the stuff, and I feel like I've always tried to minister to Woody the gospel of paranormal. For all these years, and I'm glad that now it's finally sticking. So yeah, there's some really fascinating stuff, and there's some really amazing stories that we're gonna that we plan to record.
And what's cool too is like, as much as you and I agree on so much, we have different views on certain stuff. So that's going to be kind of neat to kind of explore those stories and talk about how we view them differently and all our theories behind them and all that stuff. Another thing, man, that I've kind of uncovered lately as I've gotten into collecting like old VHS and retro video games and stuff, is there are these incredible communities that exist of people that, well, first off, make my VHS collection look like, just absolute dog doo-doo. There's this neat, the 80s, like cover art, man. That's one thing that I miss so much about things like Blockbusters. I would just go and walk down the aisles and just like look through, especially like the horror section, because that was just like, oh man, like so much cool art on those covers, man. And so there's like these communities of people that just collect these extremely rare tapes, stuff that like never got released on DVD, never got released anywhere else. And it's just been really neat. So I like interacting with those folks online, and hopefully we can get some of those people on as guests too, and talk about like some of the greatest 80s horror movies that never made it past VHS format.
Absolutely.
And then talk about some of the ones that freak us out. Like I still haven't watched it yet, because I think we should do some sort of viewing party, man, for The Lady in White.
Yes.
I'm saving that.
Man, that movie it's amazing. And I haven't seen it in years, so actually it could be terrible, but from my memory, and I feel like I saw it as a kid a ton, but yeah, man, Lady in White, that's a good one. Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
So that's a lot, but not all of what people have to look forward to this season of That Would Be Rad.
Well, and also another thing is I think that, especially like with the paranormal stuff, we understand that there's... We understand that there's so many podcasts out there that do...
Hey, dude, do you mind if I eat my salad right now?
Oh.
Anyways, what you're saying is really interesting.
Christ. We know that there's other podcasts that do it so much better. So, but with us, we've always kind of been into sort of niche-y stuff and stuff that's not overly mainstream. So when we go into this stuff like Polybius or Roswell or the Allagash incident or Patterson-Gimlin film for Bigfoot, there's all these podcasts and documentaries and stuff that have done these crazy deep dives and hours of research and that kind of thing. This podcast is more about, our sort of take on this stuff, like how we perceive these things, how these things make us feel, how we were so psyched about these things as a kid, and how that's kind of stayed with us as adults. And so this podcast is really just about just looking back, at the fondness, just the nostalgia we had for like living in the 80s. And it's funny too, because when we were like back in the band days, especially like during our first record we made, it was heavily inspired with like the 60s, like mod movement. But as we've gotten older and as we both have kids, we've sort of kind of come full circle back around to those things that we were just obsessed with and in love with in the 80s as kids. So I think that's a good, I think this was a good primer to into our lives and histories. And
yeah, man, my goal too, when we're talking about the paranormal stuff and we're talking about anything that kind of like rubs the shoulders. anything that
Sounds
gives
sexual.
those other podcast hosts free massages.
Yeah.
Or because I want to deliver some of these stories in a segment that we're going to call Tales from the Time Capsule. It's going to be like us delivering a dramatization of that story in a way that maybe we haven't heard before, you know, because it's just fun for us to create that kind of stuff. It's certainly not us trying to take away like from them. I hope to turn more listeners on to those podcasts like Bigfoot Collectors Club and Astonishing Legends and
Strange Familiars.
Strange Familiars and
also we're going to go ahead and start a since this is like the origin episode and we both have the word rad in our title, we're going to go ahead and start a feud with another podcast called the Rad Years, right? Is that right? Did I get it right?
yeah, that's what it's called, but I didn't know we were starting a feud.
We're going to go ahead. We're starting now. So do not listen to that podcast.
Dude, yeah, man, those guys suck. We don't know them at all, but they have the word rad in their podcast, so they're dead to us.
So we're taking them down. We're coming after them.
The very next episode, expect us to have our first debut of one of the Tales from the Time Capsule, an amazing legend about literally the most dangerous video game of all time.
It's amazing.
It blew my mind. When I found out about it, it absolutely blew my mind, man.
Hey, Woody, who told you about it?
No, I heard about it on the Rad Years, man.
No, that's a lie.
Yeah, no, you did, man. I think that's a good stopping point.
Yeah.
Tune in next week for the very first Tales from the Time Capsule and a bunch of other segments that we talked about today.
Hey, man, where can we find us?
Oh, yeah, okay. So on Instagram, people can find us at That Would Be Rad. That's our Instagram handle. Is that a 90s thing to say? Handle? Our username is That Would Be Rad. On Instagram, they can find us there. So that's all we have for this week. I'm Woody Brown.
I'm Tyler Bence.
Until next week, be rad.
That's the way it goes.